just to sort of go back to my abstract, I've had to sort of not use deny, just based on the fact that I think, just based on what I'm going to start with, then still needs to be a lot of work for me to do this. So this is a working paper that I did for that I'm still developing, for a course I did on feminism, so from African feminism. The course was titled From Triple Oppression to Intersectionality. So this is where all of this work comes from. But what I want to sort of do in this paper is to take us through the trajectory of feminism. So from where we think it starts, from where it was developed, and in that origin, sort of find out why that is limiting for people, for instance, in the third world, and how we conceptualize our feminism and what feminism sort of means for us. And from those limitations, we sort of also want to see then how African feminism, how African American feminism looks like to us, and sort of realize that there exist epistemical cleavages that fail to acknowledge this alternative intersectional thinking of feminism. And thirdly, which I think is maybe wishful thinking, I try to sort of say that we have some gatekeepers or some leaders within African feminism, or the way we approach intersectionality, that also to a certain degree could stifle the movement in terms of not acknowledging the difference, so not acknowledging the alternative. So saying this is what feminism looks like, if you're doing something else, that is not feminism. So therefore we almost create the same cycle we seek to emancipate ourselves from. So when we look at the waves of feminism from the very beginning, basic historical trajectory, we located in the United States, we located back to Europe as well. So these are the first movement, the first waves of feminism. We look at that as the second wave of feminism as well. But what is quite interesting when I was going through this paper is that there's also an invisibility of the second wave of feminism, where we first see black women. Black women sort of dealing with the oppressions. But what is privileged on top of that is that there's only one sort of experience that is characterized to say, well, this is feminism. So things like women's suffrage, for instance, where we see women's equality at the helm of the reality, such as marriage, property rights, and the right to vote. These only represent one experience. They don't necessarily represent the experience of African American women who were also in existence then. So we need to also think about slavery. We need to also think about the positionality of black women in America then. So we move then to sort of say that in this 50-year-old history, in the waves of feminism, we sort of see that there's an erasure, there's a clear erasure that almost leads to epistemicide, where there's only one experience that privileges what is feminism. And if you look back then, there's only one experience. And that what I think for me, that is what makes Western feminism or mainstream feminism limited, because it's loosely applicable to everywhere else in the third world, and we need to think about that before we even move further. So we move in that instance to sort of see that there's a one-sided thinking where white feminist scholarship has failed at the very least to acknowledge the differences between themselves and the black woman, as well as the third world, where we've contributed to the predominance of Eurocentrism and one-sided thinking of these Eurocentric theories of women's oppression. So how do we then, as African feminist scholars, reimagine ourselves? And I want to go back to the keynote that Dr. Matsema was talking about, rewriting ourselves, rehumanizing ourselves. We need to write ourselves back into history. So how do we do that? And I want to just sort of start with a certain quote here that sort of starts, open quote. I'm talking towards Bell Hooks here, Dr. Hooks. She states first that there's an over-reliance on the academia to theorize about feminism. But this is also detrimental for bodies whom we fail in our research, as we fail to grasp their activism and their experiences. Unlike them, we occupy a privileged position accompanied by the security of our desks, right? And there's a declaration and an excessive attention paid to the academia. And this pursuit does little to change the condition of women and men and only affirms these same relations on the basis of patriarchy. So what this means to me is that even when we go back to sort of think about feminism as something that's emancipatory for us, there's a privilege of academia to sort of say, well, it needs to run through this lens. That is what feminism looks like. It needs to be like this. This is what a feminism looks like. It's what a feminist looks like. And I do use certain case studies. I use 2 case studies. I use Beyonce as a case study. I also use Zoto Abantu as a case study. And I sort of say, well, these 2 women almost challenge what the normal sense of feminism looks like, or what the academia says feminism is. Because, and I call it, and I borrow and call it celebrity feminism, where we sort of see a new branch of feminism that we can relate to, that we don't need to sort of understand oppressions. You don't have to go on to define what sort of oppression you're going through, i.e. we find it in music, we find it in poetry, we find it in art. And that necessarily does not need any validation from the academia to say, yes, now you are a feminist. Yes, now this is what feminism looks like. So, for me, Beyonce faces a lot of criticism in how she does what she does, how she portrays herself, how Beyonce, at the first instance, I'll use a normal magazine cover. For instance, she posed for GQ. And there was a lot of criticism looking at Beyonce's feminism as feminism light. And there was actually criticism to say how Beyonce looks like, the fact that she doesn't have the fact that she's not fully covered. She probably has no agency over how she looks. She's doing it for the male gaze. And that is, I think, a very shallow understanding. I think Beyonce is more than capable of deciding what she wants to look like. I think Beyonce is powerful in the way she portrays herself, in the way we sort of gravitate to her. And there's also a lot being said about why Beyonce sort of stays with her cheating husband, and why should she then be this shrine of feminism. She shouldn't. She should probably leave Jay-Z for cheating on her. You know, these are the tensions that exist around celebrity feminism. And Bell Hooks calls Beyonce a terrorist. She calls her an anti-feminist plaguing the feminist discourse. And I want to just repeat that. She calls Beyonce a terrorist and an anti-feminist plaguing the feminist discourse. So these words, I think, are very harsh. They're very loaded. And I mean, we're comparing Beyonce to something close to 9/11. I mean, we're talking about something completely, something that shook the world, particularly the American public. And to cast Beyonce out by saying she's anti-feminist, almost says to her that she doesn't belong here. And we sort of see, not a stifling, we sort of see an erasure of whatever Beyonce is trying to create. She has never come out to say she's a feminist. She's never come out to say, well, this is what I think feminism is. And I think what Dr. Hooks does there is that she polices our thinking of what feminism should look like. And we're basically calling Beyonce a bad feminist. And I don't think that's a fair assessment of her. And we almost think that Beyonce ascribes to this dominant standard of beauty and sexuality, and I think most of us think about this as an impossible standard. We think about this as a problem because women can't always maintain that standard according to some critics. And what Beyonce does to other women, particularly when we look at Lemonade, and the criticisms are around how Lemonade, for instance, was solely funded by Jay-Z. The magnitude that Lemonade has had on most people's lives goes way beyond the critique of a simple terrorist or the critique of an anti-feminist. So, for me, when we move and we think about how feminism should go, how feminism should move, I think these fractures within fractures of what was important, what is mainstream, or even an alternative thinking about feminism, we sort of need to bring in intersectionality. And this helps us to, as a theoretical tool, I think it helps us to sort of look at the movement as an emancipatory one, because we cannot always gravitate to the same things. We take what we can. And if the feminism movement is to have any growth, is to have any sustenance, I think we need to I really think we need to take into consideration that the branches perhaps make the movement grow even further. And I also like to come back to talk about the other person that I've talked to in the beginning, Uzodwa Abantu. We all know who Zodwa is, and there's a lot of criticisms about what Zodwa does, how she portrays her body, how she, and it's actually quite interesting because there's a new ad that just came out. I think most of you have seen it on Marie Claire, where for the first instance we see Zodwa wearing makeup. She is covered, and she stands with women like Kanye Drama in that magazine, and there are no critiques about that. I don't know if that's the lens that makes Zodwa a proud representation of us, beyond how she's been able to look or being able to be portrayed in the media before. And most of the criticism that face Zodwa Abantu happen through social media, but they also happen from the academia saying, well, definitely what she's doing is not feminist. But we almost forget that what Zodwa says to a lot of women is that she's comfortable in her own skin. Her stretch marks are also a part of this, and Zodwa was saying you can be who you are, simply. But there's an oversimplification of her sexuality, and I think that's a bit trivial. So this again, it goes back to the idea that we police her body. She needs to look a certain type of feminist. She needs to be behind a desk. She needs to wear specs. She needs to be fully covered, and she needs to tell us things that we don't already know. And when I think about most responses from the academia to look at Zodwa, there's another sort of, if I can relate it to the terrorist argument proposed by Hooks. Zodwa is almost called a superficial feminist, if the academia is to even introduce her into this frame of thinking for the feminism movement at all, right? And Zodwa's not come out to say she's a feminist. She's not come out to say this is the type of feminism that I'm trying to portray. This is what I'm trying to do. And I think, again, Zodwa and Beyonce's experiences reveal a very comfortable reality that almost speaks to this idea that there are gatekeepers who portray what feminism should look like. And I think the movement in that instance faces a little bit of a danger, where we're excluding other women's experiences and whatever, and we sort of inferiorize what Zodwa or what Beyonce tried to do. We think that feminism should be neat, it should be subtle, and therefore anything that does not fit that category is regarded as irrelevant or almost anti-feminist. So there's this idea that we need an intellectual stamp from the academia for feminism to mean anything at all. And these interventions by these gatekeepers, I think they are not out of touch to say, but I mean, what happens to the ordinary person who, for instance, cannot read a book? The ordinary person who cannot theorize their own oppressions, that perhaps listen to Lemonade and think, well, yes, look at Zot on social media and think, well, definitely. You know, so I think the movement should definitely retain its vouchsafe space and not mirror the ethnocentric character of the mainstream feminism that the movement sought to destroy in the very beginning. And the most important liberating aspect of feminism, I think, is to give all women a space to voice their realities as they experience them. And that is the earliest articulated goal and the most important goal of feminism. And just to end off, I'd like to go back to that quote I said, whilst they do not wear specs, sit behind their desks, or present in the academic space, they, to our generation, by the music they sing, the confidence they display with our bodies, these could be the new wave and the fractures that we take to define the feminism movement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Koaile. I just wonder whether it might be helpful to tell us whether is this part of an ongoing project, is this an article? Because then that way the feedback can be directed towards what your needs.
This is part of, well, it's an ongoing project. It's a working paper that I'm looking to advance, I guess.
Okay, for publication.
Publication, I guess, an article in any single form.
Okay, so thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so over to Rowland, and maybe you could start by telling us where is this located in your whatever larger project you're busy with.
Hello everyone. My name is Rowland, and this paper is actually an ongoing project too, but then it's an ongoing article that will be eventually published, perhaps after receiving comments here too, so I can incorporate it. So the title is African Feminisms, Paradigms, Problems and Prospects. First of all, we have the contents where we are going to look at the introduction, then the phases of feminism in Nigeria, and then the main thesis, discussion and conclusion. So what is happening here actually is to look at the idea, general idea of feminism. Then after that, try to look at the phases of feminism in Africa, using Nigeria as a case in point, more of the phases of feminisms in Nigeria. And then we look at the lacuna each of the theoretical constructions has and what has been filled, and in the end, equally profile a way out, more of a suggestion to it. So we looked at the general concept of feminism to mean a 20th century movement that seeks to eradicate all forms of systemic oppressions against women. Quoted like Tyson, at breast, such as breast cancer. That's a movement that seeks to understand the ways in which women are oppressed socially, economically, and politically, and psychologically even, in order to reduce, if not to eliminate, all these oppressions. So this is a general context, but then we've also looked at the various adaptations of this context to suit either the black women or the African, or in this case Nigerian. Beginning from the likes of Alice Walker, who theorized on womanism with the aim of domesticating it for the black feminists, with the aim of promoting mutual love amidst women. But then this movement, this idea, theory of womanism was also created a bit of lacuna, because in major parts of Africa, especially Nigeria, the same-sex interaction is actually forbidden. So the lesbian thrust of the theory equally free up that. And then Hudson Williams talks about, the next one is African womanism, where Clenor Hudson Williams tries to theorize that the theory essentially does not see the man as the woman does not see the man as her primary enemy in this theory of African womanism. Instead, just as the white feminist who battles her white counterpart for subjugating her as property, that's the major difference between African womanism and the idea of womanism. Then it now coming down to Nigeria, we equally have Stewanism, which is a product of Stewa, social transformation, including women. This is propounded by Ogundikbe Leslie Omolara Leslie Ogundikbe. So the idea is just to, according to the theories, to dissociate or distance women's emancipation from the tag feminism, since most scholars were now trying to distance themselves from the idea of feminism. For example, you find novelists or even playwrights whose works essentially illustrate the feminist story, like Marama Abba, Bessie Head, and the number, even Julio in Nigeria. Of course, these are people who write texts that we consider to be feminist in nature, but then they openly deny they openly deny the idea of feminist tag. So Ogundikbe theorized on Stewanism to say that what we are actually doing is to transform the society and include women in this transformation. And then we equally have another theory in Nigeria, the nego-feminism, that's by Urama Nemeka, where she says it means no ego feminism, that is feminism of negotiation, that there should be negotiation amongst the man and the woman instead of putting up ego and bruising one's pride and all. Chomopara equally theorizes on feminism, which according to her is a theory that women should adopt to work with their fellow women, but see the man as somebody who should be tolerated, provided he does not stand in the way of women's emancipation. So when we look at all this, we keep seeing the emphasis on man, either as an individual who is being tolerated or as an enemy or somebody to be avoided or something. Then when we look at the idea of another one, womanism, is by Chukwuemeka. Okay, this is black-centered, and it promotes, it seeks a meaningful union between man, woman, black children, and we see to it that men change from their sexist stand. Again, we see men that they should be reoriented to change from their sexist stand. Then we also see Achola knows Motherism, where she says that the aim of feminism in Nigeria should be that of promoting mutual love, promoting motherly values, promoting that mother nature in everything that is being done, in all aspects of human endeavor. And of course, we have Akacha Azibadimora's neo-sense feminism, which says that the woman should adopt the values or traits, one of the features she shares with a snail, like resilience, patience, and all that. She should adopt them in confronting challenges, more of negotiating instead of being too harsh. We have so many other varieties. And then I have tried to look at these phases of feminism and found out basically that many of these theoretical constructions are sometimes, in some cases, repetitive or even project identical messages. So it now appears as though theories are being proliferated, more of proliferation of theories. For example, when you look at nego-feminism, I don't see much difference between nego-feminism and snail-sense feminism. Yeah, because both of them equally advance the idea of negotiation, that women should negotiate their ways out. That when a snail moves and sees a thorn, it actually negotiates its way around it instead of being confrontational. So the two of them talk about negotiations, and in fact, basically many of them appear repetitive and identical, in my own opinion. And then I also see that there is this emphasis of men as either opponents, enemies, or individuals who should be tolerated. This is reflected in many literatures of Nigeria, especially literary texts, where we find out that it's either a man is being demonized or the feminist victory eventually manifests in the triumph of men. So based on all these, the research concludes so far that the efforts, instead of theorizing, as Charles Nalin would say, that it makes feminism in Nigeria a house divided against itself. That instead of doing all these, that efforts should be united towards a particular purpose. instead of the continuous theoretical, instead of every feminist becoming a theoretician, that efforts should be united towards achieving a particular purpose. And as part of the conclusion, the paper equally says that there should be the emphasis of men as enemies or individuals who should be tolerated. Instead of being too emphatic on men, whether we can pick up on issues, so many issues which affect the women in Nigeria and address them, more of making an issue-based protest, such that we can look at some of the harmful traditional practices and try to bring out how they are against women and indeed human beings. And by so doing, we can attract men and women who have good conscience to, of course, want to triumph this, instead of making it a battle of sexes. So by so doing, the research also believes that this would make feminism to gradually become a way of life in Nigeria. Thank you. It's actually a work in progress. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rowland. So I think we're very well placed to have a productive conversation. And I suggest we take a round of 3 or so questions for starters, then have a back and forth. And I'm hoping also eventually it can evolve into an organic conversation rather than a, front and back situation, if it's okay with you, gentlemen. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, is that a question? Okay, let's have a 5 one. 3. Okay, in that order.
Thank you very much. My question goes to the second presenter. Each time I want to speak, I carefully look at the men around to be sure that I have the ones on my side, because this is our spaces as women. You talked about the last term theory, Snell's theory. I didn't understand.
Snell's theory.
Yes, and you're saying that the woman should be a bit
Okay,
resilient.
Should I explain that?
No, I saw something like being too harsh. Yes, I picked that word, being too harsh. Do you think that a woman in her right sense will just wake up and become harsh against the men? Don't you think that it is this oppression, marginalization, dehumanization, decolonization that makes, when you are tired, it's like a spring, and then you press you, you just go boom. Don't you think? No, I like to be practical. That was why I raised the issue I raised when the keynote address speaker, spoke. Don't you think this? I don't like the being too harsh. No woman will just go off. If there is complicit masculinity where we can dialogue, you'll be happy. But when you discover that, okay, now the way out of this problem, you have tried the dialogue, it's not working, then you go through the other way. So don't you think that is why you see a lot of women, wake up and say, if the only way I can be heard is by violence, I'll go. I am not ashamed to say that I had to change my supervisor here at Rhodes. I politically, dramatically, strategically, just said, okay, we can just have a change. And I was almost having high blood pressure of 170. Because, you know what I mean? I mean, if an academic woman, every day you are what? You are panting. I said, I will die. And his life will continue. And my parents, my whole society would miss me. Nobody knows me here in South Africa. Nobody knows me here. I go work in a university. It's just 1 minute silence in the board of we are sorry, one of our candidate lecturers who died in South Africa. I don't want anybody to kill me. I had to. I'm saying it now, but it wasn't like that. Don't you think that's why you see women, we have tried the dialogue. And you see that, okay, dialogue is not going to work. And our speaker talked about methods and strategies. What other strategy? I wasn't violent. I just played the woman style and I got out. And as I submitted, part of my thesis, another fight came. I said, we know these things now. We'll graduate. So I want to correct. I don't know if you see the point where women begin to, I don't want to use the word, put up a confrontational attitude based on the reaction from the men. We see, I am not somebody, I talk about stewards, I'm not ready to fight against anybody, I don't have that time. But that's where you see, don't you think that is where, how many women, I know of a PhD candidate here, she left the PhD program. she had a breakdown and she left. I got a breakdown. I said, it's a lie. Jesus is Lord. And you come back. Nothing, you know. I used to sleep on light. So don't you think, I don't know if you feel my pain. Don't you think that's where you talk about resilience for how long? Or your spirit will be murdered in court. That's it.
So just have on, we'll take all three and then we'll come back to you.
I had a question for both of them. The first presenter spoke about Beyonce. Well, I have a couple of questions for him. The first question would be, in what context was Bell Hooks saying this about Beyonce being a terrorist and anti-feminist? The second question is, when you mentioned that Beyonce is powerful and she can control what she wears, have you taken into account capitalism and the fact that Beyonce is selling a product and her being scantily clad is a part of that she has to play in order to make that money? So if her power is indisputable, but the extent of her power is indeed disputable. And then the third question I have for the first presenter, I hope you're writing these down because they're coming to me as I'm talking. If we don't have some type of unity around what feminism is, then what do we have? Because then it means nothing if it means everything. So just something for you working for the second presenter, when you were talking about negotiation feminism, you mentioned that a snail moves around a thorn if he finds it there. But a thorn is an inanimate object. Patriarchal structures and sexism tend to reinvent themselves and reshape themselves as time goes along. So a woman can't just always negotiate around them. Sometimes she does have to go head on and fight. I'm gonna say this now. I don't know if y'all get mad at me, but I don't care. I'm not a feminist. I'm a man. Sexism benefits me. But as a black man in a white supremacy society, I come from the States, I understand how it is to be marginalized, dehumanized, and set aside. So I can see into some of these things. Of course, I don't feel what a woman feels. I don't know what a woman knows. I don't think what a woman thinks. But I can understand being marginalized and how, as she was speaking about how sometimes you want to fight. And it will drive you crazy if you let it. But Jesus is indeed Lord, right? So she came out with her doctrine. I came out with mine too. But sometimes you have to fight. So I think in your work, maybe you should interrogate these different types of feminism and how they work in different situations. Now I'm going to say this, then I'm going to shut up. I came to this conference because the title was African Feminisms with an S. Because I don't think that sexism is manifested in one single way, so there should be one feminism for all of them. We all know that feminism grew out of middle class and upper class white women's desire to have their rights, but the original feminism didn't work for working class white women or black women. So these women, in order to recapture their humanization, because sexism, if you normalize maleness and you denormalize femininity, then you basically taking away the humanity of women, because you're saying a normal human is a man, an abnormal human is a woman, or maybe she's not even human at all. So if you look at it from that perspective, then you will see that this is not going to manifest in the same way all the time. So you got to have these different types of feminism, and that works, and that's good. But I want to ask you. No, actually, I'm done.
Thank you.
My question is short. My question is for the second speaker, and the point that you raised about unity. And I want to know, because you spoke about it in brief. One, what is the utility of this unity that you are speaking about? Because I think that you conflated feminism as a political movement and feminism as a theoretical framework. Those two things are related, but they both have different utilities for different spaces, for different people who are working in different areas. So when you say that there should be a unified feminism, what is the utility of this unified feminism? there is a, what's the word? There is a trend within our disciplines to say we need unified or singular understandings of particular people who come from particular places. What is the purpose of that? That is my question to you, because when you say things like what you've said, that we need a unified feminism, what I see happening is we marry all these things together. A hierarchy is created in which particular types of feminisms and particular types of causes are relegated for the ones that come from the places of people of more prominence. So when you say let's unify, what is the purpose of that unity? Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take one more and then come back to the first.
I just wanted to throw in something for the first speaker. I'd be really interested, since you're talking around Beyonce and your thoughts around slave queens and the emergence of this notion of slave queen, how it relates to contemporary feminism, ghetto feminism, black feminism, where it relates, and your thoughts around that.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. The first question talked about, don't I think that being too harsh is actually a consequence of long-range accumulation of humiliation? If I got that question right. Okay. So I think where being too harsh actually came in the first place is explaining the theory of Nelson's feminism, where the theorist herself says that being too confrontational may not really yield the desired results, that negotiation remains key. That's what the theorist talks about. That more of you keep dialoguing, because even in a situation where you fight, at the end of fighting you still come to the dialogue table. So most times, like the theorist has argued, that being dialogic, just negotiating your ways out of this would really work. I'll give an instance. For example, it's becoming a bit popular that when people have little issues in marriages, they walk away. So this idea of negotiation, can't we really sit down and iron out things? That's where the negotiation is coming out. Because for every slip in marriage, you walk away, you break the home, keep the children displaced and all that. So I think that's the perspective where the theorist is coming from. That there is always that room for us to talk things out. That's my own understanding. Then the second question, okay, something I think you have suggested to me.
Colleagues, can you please have one conversation?
Okay, then unified, the third question is what do I mean by unified feminism? I think what I talked about here is more of unified efforts instead of unified feminism. So what I mean by unified effort is instead of proliferating theories, because each time you proliferate theories, we are tempted to at least adopt it anew. And by the time we've gotten to an extent, we hear that there is yet another theory countering this. Don't you think that these proliferations, consistent and continual proliferations, are a major drawback on the successes that will be recorded over time? That's the way I look at it. Yeah. Thank you.
We'll start with the first question there. I'll tackle all three at the same time, and I agree with you definitely. There where we look at Beyonce and the idea of capitalism and what sort of role she plays. I think Bell Hooks, her criticism was on the idea that we actually thought that she was questioning the fact whether lemonade was made for any of us, whether we couldn't see that this was a money-making scheme or something that was perhaps a veil over our heads to make more money, because it was very relevant at the time. It talked to a lot of personal experiences, and there was a lot of African traditions and African customs, and perhaps an acknowledgement of African art in the way lemonade became relevant here. So I think in that instance, Bell Hooks was basically just saying, well, is this even made for the ordinary person? Just looking at at your first question where you said in what context was, okay, I've answered that one. But I still think she does have power. I really do. Even from where I'm standing, I want to go back to that magazine cover where she's I think she just won either the Super Bowl or she just won an award of being recognized top 50. I don't know what was happening there specifically, but there was a lot of criticism on her image, where Hooks says she's probably not in control of how she looks. She's probably being told by the photographer what to do. She probably is not cognizant of the fact that she's selling sexuality, and she does that, and she knows. I think she does, but I actually think to a certain extent Beyonce makes Jay-Z what he is.
Yes.
You know, that's what I want to go there and just throw in there. And in terms of unity, I mean, in terms of unity, if we don't have a unified definition of feminism, then what do we have? I really go back to that idea of fractures within fractures. At the point where whatever oppression is happening in your life, and I think feminism should allow you the space to at least address that. And it doesn't matter, it might be multifaceted, it does not matter. I really think the goal is for that oppression to be realized and to be dealt with in whatever form. And that idea of unity, I think just that space, that vouchsafe space, or whatever you're bringing into the movement, that vouchsafe space is where the unity even begins, but it doesn't end there. So there's no policing that your oppression is less than another person. There's no, I think someone spoke about hierarchies. No oppression is better than the other. No experience is better than the other. So I think that idea of unity is just allowing the vouchsafe space to say, well, here's where we are. The idea of slay queens and their relationship to feminism. I'd like to talk also just to bring in the idea of black excellence here and what we sort of see on social media. And the types of expectations that we sort of think, here's what a slave queen must look like. This is what a slave queen must do. The perceptions, especially in this country, there was an interesting tweet when someone looked at Zotwa and says, well, because she looks like this, I wouldn't be surprised if she's asking for rape. And that was a tweet addressing Zotwa. I think the context is very important, particularly in this country, to address the idea of slave queens, i.e., being a slave queen, for instance, they may say you may never graduate, they may say you never go through university, you're always producing this life, this standard. And then you can do it all. But for the other person who's not a slave queen can still do that, can still not go into social media. I really think it's all about the context in the end. The idea what a slave queen is, how we sort of think a slave queen is supposed to do, but we also go back to the idea of policing. Where do we even start to say a slave queen must look like this, a slave queen must behave like that? The idea that a slave queen cannot be anything more than a slave queen. I remember actually in a seminar, a colleague of mine was sitting around a table and the lecturer was sort of speaking. And in that academic space, he almost said, pay attention, don't be like these slave queens all over Instagram, and that came from a position where you sort of saw that there was no recognition of other women's expressions outside social media or within social media. Again, the academia going to say, well, if you don't look like this, then you have to be that, and these are your perceptions, this is where you belong. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Thank you. Okay, let's have another round. Good, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's go in that order. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sure, thank you so much. Thank you guys for the presentations. So mine are not like necessarily questions, but like some contributions based on the discussion that's happening. So firstly, I think for me, feminism is about my ability to choose. So whether or not I choose to be a slave queen, or I choose to be an academic, or I choose to be both those things at the same time, which I am, it's not about, so I have a problem with the kind of conversation that seeks to essentialize what it is a feminist looks like, or what it is a woman should look like. So we must, we must be able to complicate our understandings of what feminism looks like, especially if we can agree ukuthi feminism is based on my ability to choose. Secondly then, if we want to talk about contradictions, I think, angazi, maybe it's the way that I think. For me, contradictions don't have to be like a negative thing. Like, they don't have to be this like, oh, you have to be like unified and, not be able. So the thing is that we are contradictory. Me, as a feminist, my existence interacts with my family, which is hyper-patriarchal. My feminism interacts with a homophobic KZN. My feminism interacts with a Hamanskral that can be hyper-feminist and can be hyper-patriarchal, right? So the fact that I choose to be particular things in those three different spaces isn't a bad contradiction. In fact, what I think it allows me to do is it allows me to then think about or like theorize those different spaces, right? So it allows me, which is why like this thing of we must reach some kind of consensus because the contradictions are like impeding on our ability to theorize. No, I think that the contradictions are what allows us to theorize. It's what then pushes me to question, Uguti, what is it that I was uncomfortable with in this Hamanskral that I'm not uncomfortable with in KZN? And why do I make those distinctions about myself? Beyonce is a capitalist, herself. And if she says she's a feminist, or if we can assign feminism to her and she's a feminist, it's okay to be both those things. And the fact that she can then use her sexuality, we are tired to use her sexuality. And it can't be that when we think about sexuality, we automatically think of it as an imposition. The fact that Beyonce is able to be like, I'm sexy and I'm actually in fact going to stand on this cover just wearing a panty, that's her thing, right? and the way that then interacts with capitalism is like Beyonce is making money, and she knows that she's making active choices to make money, and so that doesn't have to like then restrict her feministness, her feminism. It doesn't have to restrict that. And then lastly, I think like I'm worried about firstly, I think we have to like complicate our understanding of like overcoming and black women like being angry. Second, why must we always overcome? Why are we always overcoming things? Why like cartel of overcoming things? Because and this thing of I will overcome, for me romanticizes overcoming as if it's easy to get to the point of overcoming. It's not, right? It's not. People have a breakdown, blood pressure, towards overcoming. Why is that something that we must like romanticize and feel like it's a nice thing to get to? And then, lastly, for real.
Keep it shorter so we can as more voices as possible, as many as possible.
So, and then this idea of like negotiation and snail theory as part of feminism, I don't know, I'm worried because then I would want to ask the question at the expense of who is the negotiation happening? Who is the one who must negate and compromise? Because somebody has to compromise in a negotiation. And in a patriarchal society, who do we think this is going to happen at the expense of? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So shall we take all the four, and I'll just request you please try and condense as much as possible, then we'll hear lots more. Yeah.
My turn?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I just have a couple of questions, right? So I understand that you have a particular understanding of feminism that then, influences how you're articulating some of these concerns, right? So you both phrased feminism around women. So someone said it seeks to give all women a space to articulate the oppression, and then the speaker said to eradicate all forms of oppression against women. So at no point did you guys speak about systematic or systemic oppressions. So at no point did we mention heterosexist capitalist systems, right? So based on that, I'm then asking, how is it that you're able to navigate the space that has been solely articulated in terms of women as two men sitting on this panel, right? I find that very interesting. So, on the point of celebrity feminism and this idea of feminist gatekeeping, I think, at least I'm thinking that you're trying to allude to the inaccessibility of feminism, which I do agree with you to a certain extent. But on this point of celebrity feminism, how does it differ then from liberal feminism? And what are the benefits of either celebrity feminism or liberal feminism? Is it an individual stance? Can I wake up and say I'm a feminist and then work towards, I don't know, work against women's rights, right? If we're just saying that it's an individual position and the ability to decide how I articulate my feminism, right? And then on the second speaker, you chose very specific theorists. Once again, why these particular choice of theorists? How do they assist us in thinking around this idea of feminism, right? And then this, you said something about the proliferation of theories. What's the benefit of coming to a unified stance and then stopping there? In a world where things are constantly changing, where we're constantly trying to make sense of a constantly changing world, what is the benefit of coming to a consensus, right? That's that. And then, lastly, onto the lady at the back, this idea of choice that's coming through in terms of your thinking around Beyonce and her ability to choose. So I understand this idea of agency and choice and how it's important, but my thing is all individuals, everyone has the right or should have the right to choose. So if we're defending Beyonce as a feminist based on her ability to choose, are we cognizant of the fact that not everyone is able to choose? Working class women are not able to choose. They're not at liberty to display or articulate their agency in the way that Beyonce can, right? And are we able to understand that even this idea of agency and complicity is easily co-opted by the heterosexist capitalist system?
Thank you.
I'm just going to try and keep this very brief. It's for the second speaker, and I just wanted to point out that I think looking at so I would start with one question, and the question is, how does negotiation work? It only works within terms of the equality of a couple to be able to negotiate with one another, which is in a very idealistic framework within legal context of marriage, which is not historically or currently productive of equality, especially in Nigeria. So other places too, but in a very specific way in Nigeria. So that's one point. Then how do we go about solving that question? It seems to me that the way you speak about subjectivities and identity and man and women is still very much within the context of a European notion of an individual who makes a choice to, on an equal basis, to negotiate. And so the idea that women even have access to that notion of the human man that you're talking about, which Sylvia Wynter has a lot to critique, is not a place where I find it helpful to be able to even start that discussion. So I just have a question for you when you read your paper about how you're conceiving of the feminist within the construct of the human and the man as they are Eurocentrically conceived.
That's good. Thank you. A bit of fourth one. Yeah.
I don't have anything long. I just have some reading recommendations.
Yeah.
Beyonce's Vogue interview, which you can actually hear, her speaking about how she thinks about herself, and read it. Very good. And about women being angry, there's a book called Rage Becomes Her by Soraya Shamali, which is very good. And if you want to talk about being a bad feminist, Roxanne Kay's book, Bad Feminist.
Thank you. So I'm going to take the liberty of asking the gents if they would like to respond to which question, or can we throw it open and have a conversation in Bizo or whatever. No, not in Bizo. In Bizo tends to be talked about. But a more organic conversation. So you get to decide which way you'd like to go.
Just on my interpretation, I think we can throw it around.
Okay.
And to sort of just see.
Okay, so open mic. You can throw in a response to any of the issues. If you want to take a different direction, if you want to respond, if you want to throw into the table another set of questions. Because I think sometimes questions themselves are productive. And I'm interested in opening as much scope as possible for just that questioning about. Thank you. Yeah. So I'll start there and then Amaefula.
We don't get a positionality of this discussion with regards to the theories and how they come to it. So I just want to know where their positionality.
Okay. So you'll take that in a minute.
Thank you very much. I'm interested in the question of African feminism as a field, as a space. And what I do in my own work and that I feel is almost a default position, that in order to contest what we have for many reasons seen as the dominance of Western feminism, we reach for something else. And among our resources is African American feminism. But we sometimes don't locate that in a very specific context as well. And the second speaker, Rowland, is speaking about Nigeria as a case study of African feminism. Within Africa as a continent, there are certain spaces that are more published, more circulating more powerfully. South Africa, one of them, Nigeria, another of them. I wonder if we could also be critical about, what counts as African feminism, so that we locate our lineage, which seems to be sort of an unlocated global black feminism that we sometimes recognize as located and sometimes do not. But also within the continent, what counts as African feminism and who never gets cited or spoken about. So it seems to me there's certain predictable pathways, and part of our critical engagement surely must be to question what is kind of almost expected of us.
Thank you so much. And since there's no hand, as folks think, I'd just like to abuse my chair. And so I'm so glad you raised that, because for me a concern with both presentations was this emphasis on waves of feminism, and I understand I hear you exactly what you're talking about, but the thinking around waves, part of what gets lost is first, when does a movement start? Does it start when it's named feminism? Because if we think about it like that, then how do we bring on board trends in gender thought that lie outside the academy? And I think that's part of what the Beyonce conversation brings in. But even before the Beyonce conversation, the women that Dr. Musila was talking about earlier this morning, that the thinking behind that, those women might not have used the term feminist. In fact, they might have rejected strongly this term feminist. But there's an entire many generations of gender thought that happens outside the academy, outside the activist circles, outside the publishing networks, that as we track, we need to probably think about how do we make these legible? And actually, is it worthwhile making them legible? That to what extent is it in their interests to remain outside the legibilities of the academy and activism networks and other networks of knowledge production? So maybe those are some of the questions that we need to ask. I'll come to you. I just wanted to talk to the positionality question, then we'll come back to the conversation.
Okay. I think the positionality question, doesn't relate back to your question about how we sort of navigate this space from where we are sitting. And I remember presenting a paper that's similar, and I think my biggest mistake, I got there very apologetic about being a black man in Africa and trying to sort of say, well, here's me putting myself on one side, but I'll divorce myself, I'll speak without this person there. I think it's just, even when I was taking this course, to sort of confront and sort of see yourselves in those oppressions. See yourself saying, well, I've done this and I've always thought like that. How do I address those oppressions moving forward that I am also a part of, that I also perpetuate, that I also cause? And I think it's just that idea of confrontation, that idea of being able to go back and say, well, you're trash, actually. You end up, and be unapologetic for saying that. And just moving on to that idea of these waves of feminism and the predictable pathways. I think I skipped a part in my presentation where between the first wave and the second wave and the third wave, Benito Roth actually says, hang on, in this 50 years, black women were behind that veil all the time. They were trying to speak through these oppressions, but at that time they were said, well, no, you need to, we're dealing with this issue first. We'll come back to that one later. And even when we sort of think about the idea of women's marches here in South Africa, the idea that they are faced with maybe dual tensions of being able to politically, I need to improve my everyday life, I'm marching, i.e. for a certain cause. But then going back into the black community to also confront patriarchal black male, who's also facing the same oppressions, and uses that idea to almost then uses home as a masculine affirmation that this is my house. So yeah, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I do definitely that idea to find the predictable pathways, I think is we need to sort of break that and try to locate and try to find more of these experiences that don't necessarily are the right kind, so to speak. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for the questions on the. If I got one of the questions, you said, why the choice of these theorists? Why the choice of the theorists? It's not as if there's a wide range of theorists and all that. What I've tried to look at are the available theories and possibly the lacunae. What prompted the eventual theories? What prompted them? Why them? And all that. It's not as if there are so many of them and then I chose a few. These are the available ones on the phases and the different phases they represent. Then the idea of why unify in the face of changes. I think that was the question. Why do I want feminists to unify efforts in Nigeria in spite of the changing condition of human societal happenings? Okay. So the idea here is that you find this theory talking about, for example, that we can achieve these things through dialogic patterns, whereas the other one wants it in very confrontational mode. Okay? And why these? You theorize on this today, and then tomorrow we have a different thing. They appear conflicting and a bit chaotic. That's why, personally, I feel that there should be at least a middle ground, so that we don't have two extremes saying two different things at the same time. Yeah. Okay.
How do you position yourself?
Okay, I'll say as how I position myself in the okay. First of all, I would like to say that I used to be a feminist, but not anymore. Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, because I've been able to answer the questions a number of times because I only attended conferences of this nature talking about feminism when I was a feminist. But then I realized that there was this presentation as though being a man means enjoying patriarchy. And forgive me, I would like to disagree to an extent with that. That I don't think being a man actually, from my own personal subjective view, I don't think I enjoy the patriarchy because it actually burdens me with so much responsibilities, so much, in fact, most times you are not expected to cover all aspects of being human. The seminar last week, I talked about the patriarchy actually forbids me to cry in public when I'm hurt, whereas to cry is to be human. Yes. It actually toughens me, making you to become toxic. That's toxic masculinity, you know. And secondly, growing up as a young man and a young girl, you know, you have your own dreams of careers and all that. While I think of all that, I also think of how to raise money and marry you off and take care of you for the rest of my life. That's burdensome. I don't enjoy it. I think patriarchy is not, to me, so much of an enjoyment as all feminists made it look like. So I was actually also preaching that if there was a space to also discuss some of the patriarchy as being burdensome on both sides. Maybe the burden being heavier on the part of women, then it would also actually draw me back to it. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm glad we've raised I'm glad you've added onto the table the fact that men are also victims of patriarchy, because men are the most vocal people that also resist that idea that they also being victimized by patriarchy. But simultaneously, there's also the issue of patriarchal dividend, which accrues to all men, regardless of whether you cash it in or not. And some men opt to not cash that check, but there's only so much scope for men to not cash in on that patriarchal dividend. But I'm okay with you being an ex-lapsed. It's all good. Okay, shall we try and squeeze in a couple? We just have 5 more minutes, and we'll make it open conversations. They might or might not answer depending on time. You had 1, 2, 3, 4. In that order. Let's keep them very short so we can hear what
Not a question, but my contribution has to do with this idea of proliferating theories and having many theories and different ways of thinking about similar things, etc. And my issue really is when you say that they are contradictory or that they're not useful. I want to ask, who are they not useful for? Because for those of us who use them, those different branches of different ways of understanding different things are very useful. So people who are in particular positionalities, for instance, in IR, don't see why we need to have a feminist security perspective of international relations theory. That's fine for them while they're sitting in the White House. But as an African woman, I would like an African feminist perspective of security in Africa because it's of utility to me. So my contention with this thing of saying these proliferations cloud the space, they cloud the space for you who don't need to use them, and that's fine, to be fair. If you don't need to see into our spaces, that's okay because you're not working in them. And my other issue has to do with this idea of the harshness, and I think the points that you raised resonate with me because I think that there's a discomfort, whether it's in academia and society, etc., to see women who know how to express and sit comfortably in the full range of emotions. So when we cry, you're comfortable with it, but when we're angry and enraged, you're uncomfortable with it. That's where this perspective of saying when you overcome obstacles, please do it quietly so that when you do it, you don't make everybody else uncomfortable. But actually, when I'm enraged, that's the only time that you see me, which is why maybe sometimes Serena Williams needs to throw her racket out the window or ram it on the floor, because when she speaks quietly, you would have never known that she was being accused of cheating. So I think that the rage has its utility, and the more of us who are comfortable in it, the more useful it is for the people who need to see into those spaces. That's it.
So mine was really about the points you guys raised about modes of knowledge or the ways that we generate knowledge. Something that I struggle with really in my postgraduate years is that because I'm like writing more about like black women and where I come from, and because I'm trying to myself, the problem that I'm finding is that when I say, oh, this is, when I like put forward a thing, like an argument or whatever, then I'm asked, how do you know? I know because my grandmother told me. Right? And I know because I had a conversation, I was part of a conversation where my aunts were having a conversation about this thing and they were conceptualizing it in this way. The problem then is that the politics department requires me to reference the thing. Right? And they not only require me to reference, but they require me to have a particular kind of reference. And so when we want to, if we want to take seriously that we need to change or we need to accept that there are different ways of generating knowledge, we must be able to accept that for me as a Zulu person, or really as an African person, that's how I learn, and that's how knowledge is generated and passed down in my spaces. How then am I able to reflect myself truly in this space if I'm not allowed to reflect that?
So my question is a little bit related to what you were saying, in that there seems to be, everyone is throwing around this word theory quite a lot, particularly in the second speaker. You talk about a lot of theorists and a lot of theory, and I wonder perhaps maybe if it's there's too much of an emphasis on this, on this theoretical stage, I think it sounds like as if there are a number of people who are voicing different knowledges or different viewpoints, different frameworks, different concepts, but a theory is something that is quite large and it's quite meta, and I think that within a theory you have different tangents and different ways in which you can use it. So as a mathematician, in my younger years, there's just many ways in which you can access knowledge and validate knowledge, and that theory is not the only way. And I think that the emphasis on theory is actually incredibly northern-centric and doesn't embrace this movement towards building global South epistemologies. And so maybe it's an epistemic framing, something like that.
Incidentally, the article that he's citing, the nego-feminism of Koaile actually raises those conversations. And part of her invitation to us is to ask ourselves, what do we mean when we say theory? And I think part of the challenge is many of us have been raised in intellectual traditions that have very rigid ideas of what is theory. And I like her work because she opens that door completely and says theory is larger than what we term theory, doesn't always come wearing the same outfit as Foucault, Bakhtin, etc. Okay, there was a hand at the back.
I'm having trouble articulating what I want to say, so I'm just going to abandon it. I just want to respond to that. To the second speaker, you mentioned that feminists poise an enjoyment in the patriarchy, and that doesn't quite match up to your lived experience of being a man. You know, you don't enjoy the consequences of being or having patriarchal capital. And it's also something that I myself have struggled with, you know, detaching myself from that capital. But I don't think, and in no feminist text that I've ever read in my life, or in any feminist discussion I've been involved in, or had the pleasure of being involved in, have feminists poised the patriarchal capital as something that men enjoy. It's something that is imposed on everyone. It is not something, perhaps you get some individuals who will enjoy that power, but that's also just, I think, human nature. If we get hold of some kind of capital, we grab it, we take it, we run with it. We just allow it to become our power and we move on. And then you get some individuals who want to separate themselves. And I just wanted to say that that entire response that you gave was, in and of itself, a feminist response, whether you'd like to term it that or not. So I just wanted to critique your idea that you're an ex-feminist because you're out here making feminist discussions. And you don't necessarily have to attach yourself to feminism to make that discussion, but I just wanted to point that out to you. That's what I was having trouble articulating. I didn't want it to seem like an attack.
I think you've done a brilliant job of it. and I just want to throw the word structure onto the table, because I think that's part of what's missing from the conversation, whether it's around agency. Agency is another, agency, choice, negotiation. These things don't happen in vacuums. They happen within structures of containment, of restriction, of freedom, and resources. So not all of us have the same resources to mobilize in order to activate our agency. And I think that's where questions of negotiation come in as well, that under what circumstances do we activate what kinds of relationships. So structure, I think we need to really carry along structure, even as we talk agency, as we talk choice, and then the resources that are available within the structures we find ourselves in. And I think the gents underline the question of context. But now I'm becoming a panelist. Okay, last word, 10 seconds each. Or you can actually say you're done, that's all good.
Yeah, 10 seconds, literally.
Well, I think for me the biggest contribution was the positionality question. Coming from Lesotho, where I was raised, you sort of see that it is actually a matriarchal society. Khodu, that's Moshesho's mother, really was to give birth to the Lesotho nation, and not a lot of people do that, or know that that type of knowledge exists. So the same way that Nandi gave birth to Zulu nation through Ushak, you sort of see that, and I think that's where my positionality, I think that's where I actually try to go, to find these spaces and to sort of say, well, we should be looking here. But I like that whole idea of the predictable pathways. I'll try not to be predictable.
And you're not a lapsed feminist.
No.
Good.
Okay, thank you so much for the questions and contributions. They are very, very helpful when you look at them. And the idea of a patriarchy being imposed, yes, I agree with you, and I like that so much. But then I would have also liked it more if you agreed that these feminist writers do not equally accept that patriarchy is as well burdensome on men. That's just it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists.
Thank you so much to the panelists, to Grace for chairing this session, for all your participation. It has been very lively. I'm doing just practical things. Tea and scones are ready. Write down. I think if you're going to move to file, I'd go with your cookie, your scone. So because you might get there and there are no scones, and you're like, I left scones in the English department. For those of you who need toilets, on the first level, this at the end, we have gender neutral. Second level, male. Top level, female. Choose your poison. Thank you so much, and looking forward to the next session.